They never tell you this. But when God truly anoints you, life does not get easier, it gets more dangerous. Padre Pio knew this better than almost any man who ever lived. He carried the wounds of Christ on his body for 50 years. 50 years of bleeding hands, 50 years of attacks, accusations, and suffering that made no human sense. The Vatican suspended him. His superiors doubted him. The people closest to him misunderstood him. And through all of it, he never stopped saying the same thing to every broken soul who sat across from him in that confessional in San Giovanni Rotondo. He told them, "The moment heaven marks you, hell takes notice. Not eventually, immediately." Padre Pio saw it happen over and over. A person surrenders to God, truly surrenders, and within weeks, their life begins to shake. Friendships vanish. Doors that used to open start slamming shut. A heaviness settles over the mind that no amount of prayer seems to lift. And they come to him asking what they did wrong. He would look at them and say something that silenced the room. "You did nothing wrong. You just became a threat." And if you have been feeling lately like everything around you is falling apart the moment you chose to follow God, this is not a breakdown. It is confirmation. What Padre Pio revealed about the signs of a dangerous anointing will change how you see every battle you are currently fighting. And what he said next, almost no one who carries this weight has ever been told. But what Padre Pio was about to reveal was not just about spiritual attacks or hard seasons. It was about something far more personal than that. Something that most people who are suffering right now will never connect to their own calling. Because here is what almost no one understands about Padre Pio. He did not just teach these things, he lived them. Every sign he identified in others. He had already carried himself, in silence, in pain, and in a faithfulness that cost him everything. For years he was forbidden from saying public mass, forbidden from writing letters, forbidden from ministering to the very souls God had sent to him. He was watched, investigated, and doubted by the very institution he loved. And yet he never became bitter. He never walked away. To understand why what he said carries the weight that it does, you first need to understand what kind of man was saying it. Because these were not the words of someone who theorized about suffering from a distance. These were the words of a man who bled, literally, under the weight of his own anointing. That is not a secondary detail, it is the key. Without it, everything that comes next loses the force it was meant to carry. And that is exactly what I am going to show you now. There was something about Padre Pio that had no parallel among the men of his generation. He was not a theologian with academic credentials. He was not a political figure inside the church. He was a simple Capuchin friar from a small town in southern Italy who had asked for nothing more than to suffer for God. And yet, what flowed through his life was so undeniable, so documented, and so consistent across decades that even his most determined skeptics could not fully explain it away. This is not speculation. The evidence is recorded in thousands of pages of Vatican investigation files, in the sworn testimonies of physicians who examined his wounds, in the letters of bishops, cardinals, and ordinary people who encountered something in that confessional that changed them permanently. His stigmata, the physical wounds of Christ, bled for 50 years and were examined repeatedly by medical doctors who could offer no natural explanation for why they never became infected, never worsened, and carried, according to multiple witnesses, the scent of flowers rather than decay. But the wounds were only the beginning. Multiple people who had never met each other, coming from different countries and different decades, reported the same experience. Padre Pio knew things he had no natural way of knowing. He called people by name before they introduced themselves. He identified sins in the confessional that penitents had never spoken aloud. He appeared in locations where his physical body was not present, a phenomenon reported by soldiers during both world wars, documented in military accounts that had no religious motive to fabricate. These were not rumors passed through devotion. They were independent testimonies that converged on the same impossible conclusion. And it is exactly because of this that what Padre Pio said about the signs of a dangerous anointing carries a weight that no sermon, no book, and no motivational message can replicate. He was not speaking from theology alone. He was speaking from sight, from experience, from 50 years of carrying something that the visible world could not contain. He was not describing what he believed. He was describing what he saw. And now I am going to show you exactly what that was. The teaching that Padre Pio returned to again and again, in the confessional, in his letters, in the quiet conversations witnessed by those closest to him, was this: A dangerous anointing does not look like blessing. It looks like attack, not the comfortable version of anointing that fills churches with applause and fills lives with ease. He was speaking of something far older, far heavier, and far more real. He was speaking of the kind of anointing that marks a soul for a mission so specific that the spiritual world reorganizes itself in response to it. This may seem like a strange comfort compared to the problems you are facing right now. But Padre Pio understood something about this kind of anointing that almost no one ever stops to consider. The attack is not the opposite of the calling. The attack is the confirmation of it. A dangerous anointing is not simply God's favor resting on a life. It is God's purpose lodged so deeply inside a person that it cannot be removed by circumstances, by suffering, or by the silence of heaven in a dark season. It is not a feeling. It is a direction. And because it is a direction, it draws resistance the way a current draws pressure. The enemy does not attack what poses no threat. He attacks what carries oil. Padre Pio saw this in the lives of those who came to him shattered and confused, convinced they had done something to deserve the chaos surrounding them. And he would tell them, with a certainty that came not from comfort, but from conviction, "You are not being punished. You are being prepared. The fire around you is not your destruction. It is your refinement." When a soul ignores this truth, it interprets every closed door as rejection, every season of silence as abandonment, and every attack as evidence that God has stepped away. And that misreading is precisely where the enemy wants them: confused, disoriented, retreating from the very post they were placed on. And now I'm going to show you exactly how this anointing manifests, and why almost everyone who carries it fails to recognize it in themselves. One of the most common ways a dangerous anointing reveals itself is through intense spiritual warfare without a clear reason. When a soul carries this kind of calling, it does not need to do anything wrong to come under attack. The very fact of the calling is enough. Sudden confusion, emotional heaviness, waves of fear or anxiety that arrive without warning and without cause. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of weight. The enemy does not waste energy on what poses no threat. He targets what carries oil. Padre Pio saw this pattern in hundreds of souls who sat before him. People who described waking up drained, oppressed, and under pressure, even when the visible circumstances of their lives looked fine. He recognized it immediately, not because it was strange, because it was familiar. He told them what Paul wrote in Ephesians, that the battle was never against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in unseen places. The warfare, Padre Pio said, was not proof of God's absence. It was evidence of His presence. Another form this anointing takes is isolation, sudden, painful, and deeply misunderstood. There comes a season in the life of a dangerously anointed person when the people they counted on begin to disappear. Friendships fade without explanation. Relationships shift in ways that make no sense. A feeling of being unseen, misunderstood, or quietly rejected settles over everything. And the natural response is to assume something has gone wrong. But Padre Pio spoke about this with great clarity. He had lived it himself, forbidden from ministry, separated from the very work he was called to. And he said that isolation is not punishment, it is preparation. Heaven, he would say, hides what it intends to reveal. God removes the noise so he can build the foundation. He pointed to David, anointed as king and sent back to the fields. To Joseph, chosen for greatness and thrown into a pit. Their isolation was not abandonment. It was the classroom where God shaped what public life alone could never produce. A third manifestation is relentless attack on the mind and emotions. When a person carries a dangerous anointing, the enemy cannot touch the calling itself. So he goes after peace. He plants anxiety where faith should be. He amplifies doubt until the voice of God feels quieter than the noise of fear. A person prays and feels nothing. They seek clarity and find confusion. They do everything right and still wake up heavy. Padre Pio understood this deeply. He pointed to Elijah, a prophet who called fire down from heaven and then collapsed in the wilderness begging God to take his life. The spiritual high had attracted a mental low. Padre Pio told those who came to him in this state that their peace was not gone, it was under siege. And a city under siege is a city worth taking. The more the enemy attacks the mind, he said, the more dangerous the anointing has become. The fourth sign is unexplainable delays and doors that will not open. A dangerously anointed person prays for opportunities that never materialize. They apply, prepare, believe, and watch things fall through in ways that seem almost designed to discourage them. And the question that rises is always the same. God, did I miss something? Padre Pio had a clear answer for this, repeated to countless souls across 50 years of ministry. Delay is not denial. It is divine protection. He reminded them of Joseph, whose dream required betrayal, imprisonment, and years of silence before the throne ever appeared. The delay was not punishment, it was development. Premature promotion, Padre Pio warned, can destroy what divine preparation was designed to sustain. God slows the anointed soul not to stop it, but to strengthen it. Heaven has not forgotten. It is perfecting the timing. The fifth and final sign is an unshakable sense of purpose that survives everything. This is perhaps the most quietly powerful of all. A dangerously anointed person may cry, may doubt, may feel completely unworthy of the calling they carry. But they cannot quit. Something inside refuses, not out of stubbornness, but out of something deeper than will. A whisper in the spirit that says there is more, that this is not the end, that the story is not over. Padre Pio called this the seal of God on a life. He said it could not be explained and could not be manufactured. It was simply there, surviving every attack, outlasting every season of darkness, pressing forward even when every visible reason to continue had disappeared. He told them to pay attention to that refusal, to treat it as holy, because it was. He said this simply and directly to those who sat before him, broken and unsure. Pray without stopping. Trust without demanding an explanation. Remain at your post. And he promised that when God finally revealed what he had been building in the silence, every battle, every closed door, every season of isolation would not just make sense. It would look like mercy. And now I am going to show you what changes when a person truly begins to live this way. That person who walked into the confessional in San Giovanni Rotondo shaking, convinced they had done something to deserve the chaos surrounding them, walked out different. Not because Padre Pio said something complicated, because he said something true. He looked at them and named what they were carrying before they could find the words for it. And in doing so, he gave them back something the warfare had been slowly stealing. Not comfort, clarity. The understanding that the attack was not the end of the story. It was the middle of it. Padre Pio himself lived this until his final breath. He suffered misunderstanding, restriction, physical pain, and spiritual darkness that few human beings in history have endured. And yet the fruit of his life is documented across every continent, in healings, in conversions, in the testimonies of millions who encountered something through him that they could not find anywhere else. He did not just teach the anointing, he wore it. Every scar was a sermon. And the question his life leaves for anyone paying attention is simple and uncomfortable. If the attack is confirmation, and the isolation is preparation, and the delay is protection, what have you been interpreting as evidence that God forgot you? That was actually evidence he chose you. The question is not whether you recognize these signs in your life. The question is what you will do with them starting today. If this video helped you see something you had not seen before, consider subscribing to this channel and leaving a like, because teachings like this need to reach every soul that is fighting alone right now, and your support is what makes that possible.